In the early months of 2026, the world's energy and chemical markets moved with familiar rhythm. Tankers flowed, feedstocks moved, supply chains hummed. No one knew the heartbeat was about to stop. When US and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes on Iran, the shock wasn't confined to the battlefield. It rippled outward into shipping lanes, energy markets, and the chemical backbone of the global economy. At the center of the storm lay the Strait of Hormuz, the chemical industry's aorta, a narrow passage carrying up to 25% of the world's oil and 35% of global naphtha trade. And in an instant, that artery closed. 2,000 vessels, 20,000 seafarers, trapped inside the Gulf. No refueling, no crew changes, no safe harbor. Crews rationed food, water, and medicine, waiting for a conflict they couldn't see to end. Oil markets erupted. Brent crude surged past $100. Middle Eastern benchmarks like Dubai crude shot above $150. The International Energy Agency smashed the glass on its emergency reserves, releasing 400 million barrels. 20 days of normal Hormuz flows deployed in a single move. Then came the LNG crisis. Qatar, source of 20% of global LNG, had no alternative route. Every cargo from Qatar, the UAE, and Oman was stranded behind a closed gate. In South Asia, the impact was immediate. India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, dependent on the Middle East for over 70% of their LNG, faced soaring prices, fuel switching, and the threat of rolling blackouts. And then the shockwave hit chemicals. The Middle East supplies a quarter of global propane, nearly half of global butane, and over a third of global naphtha. Overnight, the world's feedstock lifeline snapped. More than 15% of global ethylene capacity and nearly 7% of propylene sat inside the conflict zone. Plants slowed, inventories surged, force majeures spread like falling dominoes. Entire value chains, from methanol to polyethylene, showed up to 20% of global capacity exposed. This wasn't a regional disruption. It was a global vulnerability map suddenly illuminated. In Europe, producers fought to stay online as naphtha and energy costs exploded. Restocking drove a brief surge, but buyers resisted price hikes and margins collapsed. China, cut off from Middle Eastern LPG, pivoted to the United States, reshaping global trade flows. And in the chaos, US producers surged ahead, powered by abundant domestic ethane, crude oil, and rising export demand. Then came the twist no one expected. Insurers pulled war risk coverage. It wasn't missiles that sealed the strait, it was insurance. Without coverage, ships simply couldn't go. Carriers rerouted around Africa, adding up to 2 weeks to voyages. Ports from Oman to India to Sri Lanka buckled under congestion. Governments turned to demand-side triage, 4-day work weeks, remote work mandates, export caps on refined products. Policy became a tool not just to guide economies, but to ration molecules. Global GDP forecasts fell by 0.4 percentage points. Inflation jumped from 3.3 to 4%. On paper, the numbers looked manageable. In chemicals and transport, the damage ran far deeper. For Middle East producers, the blockade meant billions in lost export revenue, money meant to fund national budgets and build a post-oil future. Europe faced a stark choice: pay soaring feedstock costs to keep local production alive, or import more derivatives and finished goods from Northeast Asia. Restocking brought a temporary surge, but beneath it lurked a deeper risk. If inflation and uncertainty persisted, the world could slide back into another wave of destocking. Analysts expected the conflict to last 6 weeks, but even after the shooting stops, it could take 12 more for oil flows and marine transit to normalize. Crisis moves fast, recovery crawls. The Strait of Hormuz crisis didn't just disrupt markets, it rewired them. Trade routes shifted, arbitrage windows opened, supply chains regionalized. The old patterns of supply and demand adjusted. The winners: U.S. petrochemical producers powered by abundant domestic ethane. U.S. producers ramped up crude oil, liquefied natural gas, polyethylene, methanol, MEG, and LPG exports, stepping into the vacuum left by the Middle East. and losers. Middle Eastern producers have the biggest casualties. For the Middle East, the blockade was devastating. Billions in export revenue evaporated. Oil, LPG, naphtha, and petrochemical cargoes sat stranded. Upstream wells shut in. Storage filled. And economies built on hydrocarbon exports felt the strain immediately. 8 million barrels per day of crude lost. 2 million barrels per day of condensate and NGL stranded. National budgets relying on oil revenue destroyed. In addition, Southeast Asia faced the sharpest pain. India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, dependent on the Middle East for over 70% of their LNG, were hit with soaring prices, fuel switching, and the threat of blackouts. In Europe, producers stayed online, but at a cost. Naphtha prices surged, energy costs spiked, margins collapsed, and buyers resisted every price increase. Europe remains a high-cost feedstock region with reliance on Middle Eastern naphtha coupled with rising freight and insurance costs. The risk of losing competitiveness to Asia remains. This was the Strait of Disruption, and its lessons will echo through global chemicals for a generation. If you've ever wondered what the United States trump card is, it's the fact the U.S. controls most of the world's crude oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids.